Video games are often engineered to steer the player towards feeling certain emotions. Some, like Animal Crossing, convey a sense of peace and contentment. Others, like Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, are created to be a frustrating playthrough.
No, I'm not done. No, I'm done. No, I swear I was done. Oh my God, I'm done. Oh God, fuck. No, my God.
An argument can be made that the way video games cater to your emotions puts them in a state of near servitude. You buy and play a video game because you want to, and what happens in that digital world is often well within your control. At least until other people are involved.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, just listen. No, okay, you fucking yourself.
But no matter how great and well written a game is, that ruling power or sense of understanding can become widespread and even boring. That's when a new genre comes into play, branching from the same tree but wholly different from its neighboring groups. Horror. There's all sorts of flavors of horror. You've got psychological horror, stealth-based horror, and likely the most well-known subgenre, survival horror. A game that falls into one of these categories will look very different from one that is categorized differently, and yet one central point ties them all together. In each case, the main scare factor comes from the realization of your own lack of control within your life. In a world where we are used to holding power of some kind, or being entitled to an opinion that matters to something, being immersed in a world where you're stripped of all of that leaves you feeling bare and vulnerable. Games that can give the player a direct shot at that feeling are able to encompass that loss of control the best. In Resident Evil 7 and 8, this is not only encompassed in the terrifying gameplay of the pair, but also in the story of the main character Ethan Winters when he loses control over his life to the mold, the main overarching antagonist of the two games, and one that has a terrifying basis in the real-life biological functioning of mold. By its own nature, a mold infection is a complete loss of oneself. Ethan is no exception, but despite this, he maintains his humanity. Ethan's whole body is replaced by spores and his original consciousness lost, but in the end, he is still himself. The loss of control in one's life is easily one of the greatest shared fears among the human species, even if only subconsciously. The knowledge that you have the ability to think and make decisions, but that they won't influence anything, leaves one feeling used and lost. Throughout both Resident Evil, Biohazard, and Village, the theme of losing control is portrayed through the rapidly growing mold, an infectious strain of slimy fungi capable of infecting human cells, both still functioning and long deceased. The mold, though its evolutionary origins remain unknown, has been traced to a small Victorian village in eastern Romania. By carbon dating mold growth here, it is expected to be around a millennia old and appears to be the starting point for all mold and its strains within the Resident Evil universe. Growing underneath the village's cemetery for centuries, the mold colony reached outwards through the ground and infected the bodies within their graves. As it spread, a fungal root formed underneath known as the megamycete, a giant databank and central hub for the mold growth. The mold infecting the corpses within the cemetery began copying its host's DNA through a process known as horizontal gene transferring. We'll touch back up on that later. In a living human host, the mold spore performs HGT by copying the DNA of its host and assimilating it, becoming a copy of the cell. In practice, the spore would then replace the cell, performing its normal function unnoticed by the immune system. This replacement spore would go and send out more spores to spread the infection, and it is through this transfer and replacement process that the mold infection spreads throughout the host's anatomy. In the case of the village cemetery, with no active immune system to inhibit it, the mold could quickly grow through and absorb the decaying hosts. The genetic information, and even the consciousness and memories of its host would be stored within the megamycete, forming a gigantic archive. In successful infection cases within living humans, the mold would be able to access this genetic information and imprint the stored consciousnesses into the host, creating possibilities where centuries of information could be passed through host or consciousnesses fully swapped between host and root. This later becomes the central point of Resident Evil Village as Miranda, a biologist within the village, begins experiments with the mold in 1919. Spreading outwards into dead hosts is very simple and straightforward for the mold, but the much more complex process of infecting a living host is both dangerous and highly rewarding. The mold is spread through airborne spores, which when inhaled travel through the bloodstream and make their way to the brain, where a mycelial growth is formed. This growth spreads tendrils of the mold throughout the brain of the host, attempting to form a parasitical bond with the nervous system of the human. Signs of mycosis, or fungal infections, are usually hidden in successful assimilations, but leave their host sensitive to a curious property of the mold known as quorum sensing. Commonly used in bacteria colonies, quorum sensing is when one member of a group or hive exhibits changes in behavior, which all the other members then begin to exhibit, even if not exposed to the same stimuli that caused the original change. In Resident Evil Biohazard and Village, the mold uses quorum sensing to exchange information between spores, be that genetic information, a consciousness, or general knowledge of the gross surroundings. As stated, successful assimilations with mold and hosts usually mean that the host is susceptible to becoming part of this conversation circle, though it does mean that it's possible to control mold streams yourself, as many antagonists do throughout the series.
This is your fault!
However, most mold infections go poorly, and unsuccessful attempts usually end in death and a mold overgrowth within the corpse. In Resident Evil 7, the form of mold shown is a bioengineered strain controlled through quorum sensing by the child bioweapon Evelyn, as shown here. Under her control, the mold growths within the corpses would continue to grow, using the body as fuel and a post to grow upon. Terrifying creatures known as the Molded would be formed. They are nothing more than colonies of mold being used by Evelyn to protect herself.
What the fuck?
In the case of a successful mycelia growth, the human host is not affected and the infection usually will go unnoticed. As time goes on, spores detach from the growth within the skull and travel throughout the body. When coming into contact with host cells, the spores perform a unique genetic transfer of material known as horizontal gene transferring. Basically, the mold spore copies the DNA of its host and assimilates it, becoming a copy of the cell. The spore will then kill and replace the host cell, performing its normal function, going unnoticed by the immune system. It will send out more spores, and with luck, the mold infection spreads throughout the host anatomy completely. In the most successful cases, the mold can completely replace one's body, with them still being able to use it as normal, such is the case with Ethan Winter.
Resident Evil 7 Biohazard opens up with Ethan watching recordings Mia had sent to him. One on a ship that just so happens to be carrying Evelyn, the bioweapon, which crashes and is found by the Bakers, who quickly kidnap Mia and are slowly absorbed by the mold as seen in the note found in one of the drawers in Grandma's room. Ethan gets these videos 3 years after her disappearance and begins to look for her in the Louisiana town of Dulvey. There, he finds Mia and tries to help her escape until she goes berserk on him, wielding a chainsaw and cutting off his hand in the process. The player is forced to kill Mia, or at least we think she's dead, and is then punched by a man with gray skin, later revealed to be Jack Baker as he states,
"Welcome to the family, son."
It is revealed toward the end of Resident Evil 8 by Evelyn that Ethan died at this moment, and his body continued to become mold. We see Marguerite, the mother of the Baker family, stapling on Ethan's severed hand that heals pretty quickly due to his infection. We also meet Grandma Lucas, both molded members of the Baker family, and Zoe, the unmolded, disowned daughter that gives you tips throughout the game in the form of phone calls.
You did good, Ethan.
Zoe, right? What the fuck are these?
Shut up and listen if you want to stay alive.
The family also frequently alludes to serving a higher being, which is later revealed to be Evelyn, who controls the mold and every organism it infects, trying its hardest to reproduce. The most effective way this is accomplished is by murder. We also get a sense of how the mold works and its regenerative properties with the first fight with Jack Baker in the garage. We shoot him multiple times and even set him on fire, but he regenerates and fights us later.
Oh boy! Now look what you done, motherfucker!
after exploring the basement and experimentation rooms, where we see the full power of the mold. We see an alien-like creatures embedded in the walls and incinerators with the names of the victims of the Baker family. They're people inside a molded husk, but they have no agency. Their entire life is controlled by Evelyn. She keeps the Bakers semi-conscious because she needs them to live so they can kill more to reproduce. However, that begs the question, if Evelyn is controlling the mold and Ethan is mold, why does Ethan not turn? Resident Evil 8 Village follows Ethan, Mia, and their baby Rose 3 years after the events in Louisiana. After being saved by Chris Redfield, the pro-tag of Resident Evil 1, Mia and Ethan move to Romania where they undergo military training and have a child. Mia, or what the player thinks is Mia, gets pumped full of lead. Ethan and Rose are kidnapped, but Ethan escapes. Ethan discovers a cult led by Miranda and her lords, one of which, Lady Dimitrescu, along with Mia, repeatedly hints to Ethan that he is dead. This is later explicitly shown by Evelyn after Ethan's second death when Miranda pulls out his heart. He starts to decay in his dream state with Miranda, but endures, defeats Miranda, and hits his Hayflick limit and dies for good after killing Miranda and exploding the Megamycete. The mold's interesting properties are what makes it so adept at controlling and taking over its prey. The mycelial growth that forms within the brain, like with the case of Ethan, often goes unnoticed, allowing the infection to spread. The process with which the mold supplants its host occurs through the passing of genetic information, known as horizontal gene transferring. As it's not a complete body like the original host, the mold cannot form as a complex organism. Therefore, it uses quarren sensing to control each spore in unison. Much like bacteria colonies, spores that have replaced a host's cells will send signals to each other and back to the mycelial growth, acting almost as a rudimentary Bluetooth system. If done properly, like in the rare case of Ethan Winters, the infection can grow without notice, even replacing every cell in the body. While his body is completely replaced, Ethan still holds onto his identity and his memory of the experiences that he has had that form that identity. We see that Ethan still remembers who he is by hanging onto his love for Mia, and we see how he retains his memories with how much he references the events of RE7 and RE8. You may be thinking,
Skye, Quinn, if the mold completely reformed his body, how does he retain these memories that shaped him?
and to that I say,
We do not care.
But in actuality, due to the compatibility that Ethan has as a host, the mold must have reformed his brain and the neural pathways one-to-one. These neural pathways encode Ethan's memories and experiences which, for every human, shape our identity, who we are, and how we think. Identity forms who we are, and nothing and no one can take away from that. If asked the question, if every part of Theseus' ship is replaced, is it the same ship? We would respond with, is it the same crew? The dynamic, attitude, and chemistry of the crew is what makes the ship run, and that's what matters. You are who you are, and no one can change that but yourself.